co-hosts again?
Absolutely. Give me just one moment. I will do that.
Sure.
Okay, so I think you should be set now.
All right. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of admitting someone in the waiting room.
That is perfectly okay.
All right. Okay. Well, that was exciting. And so, as I was saying, so I've been in IT for a long time and done a lot of this kind of work. And it's interesting because I'm not usually the person that is the presenter. I'm normally fixing the problem. So this is a good experience for me, for sure. So we just went through the veteran stereotypes and now into the neurodiversity stereotypes. And we have some really, really great words. And so Sheila's going to be putting the link back up if she hasn't already. Yep, she has already for the neurodiversity. So if you want to take a couple more minutes and add some, we have some good ones here: genius, savant, different, autistic, short attention spans. So if you want to add a couple more, I'll give you a minute, and then we'll start discussing. Good. All right. This is a good set of words to work off of. So with both the neurodiversity stereotypes and the veteran stereotypes, let's start talking about the impacts. And go ahead and unmute, and we can have a discussion. So what do you think some of those impacts would be for a neurodiverse veteran? What's the what do some of those stereotypes and stigmas, how might that play out in the either at school or in the workplace?
I can certainly speak to it as an instructor. As Tom was talking about earlier, in our area, we have a lot of both active duty and retired veterans. And I can see now, as I have learned more about this, learn more about neurodiversity issues and veterans issues than when I was first teaching, experiences that I had with students stick out in my mind where I knew they were veterans or active duty, and they didn't participate in class or they didn't turn in assignments. And I thought maybe they were just lazy or unmotivated. And instead, now I look at things in a way where I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe this student, diagnosed or undiagnosed, has some extra things going on. And how can I not add to whatever they have going on in their world?
Yeah, that's good. So what are some of the things that that you've seen as part of their world?
I had one student that I still remember very clearly. I had a ridiculously morning early class. It started at like 7:40 in the morning. And I had coffee and donuts for everybody every morning. And he came and he sat in the back and he didn't really participate. He would talk to me if it were just the two of us in the classroom. He was very, very jovial, very genial. We had good conversation when it was the two of us. But when other students started showing up, he kind of clammed up. And I asked him about that one day, and he said, well, I have some social anxieties. I have an emotional support animal, but I don't bring my emotional support animal to school because it makes things awkward. And I said, well, you're welcome to bring the animal to the classroom. And he said, I don't really want to do that. And I said, okay, however I can support you, just let me know. And as we progressed always turned in his work on time, the work was always quality. But as we progressed in the term, he eventually stopped coming to class. And I noticed. And so I wrote him several times, was like, hey, just wanted to check, see if there's anything I can do to support. And he wrote back and he's like, yeah, I'm just trying to get stuff together. He eventually stopped coming to class, eventually stopped responding to my inquiries for support. And I often wonder what happened at the time. The college that I worked for didn't have a lot of supports in place for veterans, and they didn't have a lot of ways for instructors to let the university know or let the college know that, hey, we have a student that's struggling and could need some extra support. We have some great supports now, but I certainly wish we would have had them back then.
Yeah. As you were trying to help, did any of the stereotypes or stigmas come into play during that?
Yes, the other students thought he was really awkward, right? I for a long time had a group project and had several veterans in the class, and that's not something that we get typically when we get our student information. And so they were all spread out in different groups. I don't know that I would have gone back and put them all in a group, but I do remember getting kind of complaints at the end, when I had them basically grade each other about him being kind of awkward and not showing up and doing his part, and not really contributing in a way that that made the group feel like he was there and available.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thanks, Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
Who else has a story or how the stigmas might impact? Well, I can tell a little bit of my own story. One of the, and this is actually pretty recent, as I took a management position at a company. My staff later admitted to me that they had looked me up because they knew that I was military, and that it was going to, they were worried that I was going to be too strict, rude, not listen, and so on. And then my own neurodiversity kicked in, my own ADHD, and so so had to work through some of that as well, and because there's all kinds of stigma and stuff around it. Anybody else? Kelly or Rebecca?
I'll say that at a previous college, I worked at kind of a lot of kind of stigma and just anxiety amongst veterans was when they started, right? So it was at a community college that was close to a military base here in North Carolina. And when they were coming to the college to apply, to look into financial aid, obviously, if they were using any of their benefits there was, and they articulated, it was really, that was difficult for them to do. It was in a brand new environment. A lot of times they were just entering the civilian world. They're trying to navigate something that they haven't navigated for some time. And that was really, really difficult. And so understanding that when you got the questions from those individuals, the veterans who were on campus, kind of understanding where they were coming from and how to approach them, the ways to engage with them, sometimes being a little, taking that extra time for them, I think was really important. But there were a lot of supports on that campus for veterans. And as long as we could get them to those supports in that organization, they were really the best fit for them and to get them what they needed.
Nice. Yeah, that was. Yeah, Kelly. Kelly, with the story that you just told, do you often are there any kinds of roadblocks that come into play with faculty or other administration that might not understand some of those elements?
I think it really is yes, and I think it stems from the fact that communication may need to be different, right? And the way you use communication, we don't know if when you're interacting with a veteran, if there are any triggers for them or mental health challenges that they may have. And so I think sometimes if someone may say, oh, you just go to the financial aid office, right down that way. They may have a lot of anxiety about being there already. And so taking that extra time to potentially walk them there, walk them in the door, show them exactly where it is. That I think is where there could be some more training on how to interact and potential triggers that this student population may have, particularly it could really be any time in their life, but for that college, we saw a lot of military members who were coming right out of service right after they were discharged. And so things were very fresh for them, very, very new. So I think that is some area just in communication and whether verbal or nonverbal, there could be some training in that area.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The training, I know there are very few institutions that actually have a training program that discusses this population at all. And even in areas where there are a lot of vets. And so I think there's a lot of things that kind of hamper progress for both the students and the faculty, staff, and so on. Does anybody else want to add to this? If not, we will move on. Thank you for your stories. All right, Sheila.
In order to talk about this, even though none of these processes are linear, Tom and I were both diagnosed as older adults with our particular neurodiverse issues. But it's important to kind of start at the beginning, like understanding diagnosis versus not being diagnosed and who gets diagnosed more often, who doesn't. This quote here says, battling ADHD stigma in the BIPOC community is nothing new, but evidence shows that people of color, Black and Latino in particular, are much less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, even though they show symptoms at the same rate as white people. And if they are diagnosed, they aren't as likely to receive treatment, even though many studies show that it can dramatically help kids and adult men. I think this is true for women and femmes as well. For a long time, we looked at certain diagnosis. I remember when I was a kid, I was in physical therapy for cerebral palsy, and my physical therapist's kid showed very, at the time, what was considered stereotypical behavior for someone with autism. He rocks back and forth. He was nonverbal, and had some stems that were self-harming, but he didn't get diagnosed until he was like 8, I think. And so and he had a mom who was a physical therapist. So it goes to show that depending on what we're looking for or paying attention to, we may or may not see these things. I also think it's important to recognize the power of self-diagnosis. One of the things about a formal diagnosis that's really challenging is that there are a lot of hoops to jump through. In many cases, they are expensive and can take a long time. We had a family member who was very well behaved at school, but not very well behaved at home. And we started seeing signs that were concerning with this family member. And so we went in and asked the school to start the formal diagnosis process. And this was in April, I believe, and school was supposed to be out in June. And the counselor straight up looked at us and said, yeah, you can start the process, but there are so many hoops that it takes to jump through. And it's going to take such a long time that they're not going to get the diagnosis complete before the end of this school year. And it's not going to get followed through with over the summer. And so by the time we get into next school year, unless you bring it up again, somebody else it's going to have been dropped. So I think there are some systemic issues that we also have to remember when we talk about diagnosis and how it can help, but that it's not always an option for everybody. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about undiagnosed and diagnosed and what that can look like for people. So proper diagnosis and treated ADHD or autism or mental health issues can really change the arc of a person's life. A diagnosis helps a person to manage everything from schoolwork to relationships to career, critical areas where people of color are often face already strong disadvantages. Again, a diagnosis can be amazing. There was a place that I worked at a while ago where the CEO actually came to me and said, so I think I have ADHD. He didn't graduate high school. He was a high school dropout, didn't go on to college, but had successfully started several companies and was a very good businessman. But he was at the time in his mid 60s. And he said, would it do me any good to get a formal diagnosis now? And I was really honest with him. I said, that's up to you. If you feel like it's going to validate you and help you in certain ways, definitely follow up with trying to get diagnosed. But if you feel like you are good with things the way they are and just recognizing that for yourself is important, that's really okay too. Let's go ahead and do the next slide. Undiagnosed ADHD often presents as risky behavior. It can look like drug use in the form of self-medication, or it can look like mood disorders. In younger students, so let's say the K through 12 population, a lot of the time it looks like behavioral issues, right? Like there is the one bad kid or the two bad kids that we have in class as educators who we see the behavior issue, we see the trouble behavior, but I'm a big proponent of all behavior is communication. And if we know what we're looking for, we kind of had this conversation a few minutes ago about more training being needed for people to understand what's going on with our students, regardless of their age, and how we can support them. Let's go to the next slide.
Actually, for just a second, Sheila.
Yeah.
So one of the things, so in a lot of this, in some of the slides, we'll talk about ADHD, even though we're talking about neurodiversity. But this is kind of a there's not enough literature yet to go across all of the neurodiversity. So even though if we're talking about ADHD, it's one element, one facet. So there you go. There's your next.
Thank you. So I would like to open up the floor again a little bit, and let's talk about what are some of the things that we could do? What are some of the things that we think we would need to support students who either are formally diagnosed or who aren't diagnosed formally, but feel like they fit in certain categories? I had to laugh the other day. I was on a social media site, and somebody had posted something that was sort of representative of their experience with ADHD, and somebody in the comments said, I feel like this represents me, but I've never really been diagnosed. And the poster's original comment came back and said, it's one of those things that the more we talk about it, the more those of us who have formal diagnoses talk about what our experience is like, the more people who haven't had the experience to be diagnosed can notice these things in their own life. And sometimes it encourages people to seek out a formal diagnosis. And sometimes they're okay with the fact that they may show some of these signs as well, but they don't really want to seek a formal diagnosis, or they're not really sure what they do with it. But I do want to know what y'all think about what we could be doing to support our students in the classroom, or our employees as well, right? That's one of the things Tom was talking about a little bit, is that while we all go through the K through 12 system, not all of us go through, and some of us don't, right? Some of us are homeschooled, but all of us end up in jobs someplace usually, right? And if our employers don't have a lot of resources or training, we can also struggle as employees. So what are some things we could do, or things we could ask for, that would better support people with these kinds of, with their needs to help them be successful?
Well, I'll start. So I got a late diagnosis as well. So I was 39, and so I ran into a lot of issues. And one of the things that helped me, and has otherwise helped my own employees and my own students, is understanding that there are just other needs, and finding resources that will help. People that understand, using facilitating the discussion of how to get help. I think that could be one way.
Yep, that's a good idea.
For those in the room, what things do you or programs are available on your campuses or in your work?
Also, feel free to drop stuff in the chat. That's perfectly acceptable too.
Yep. All right. We'll honor the silence, and we'll move on.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. So one of the things we have to discuss and talk about is what happens after K through 12. K through 12, there are a lot of built-in supports for students. There's IEPs, there's 504s, anything that's covered under IDEA all gets a lot of support in K through 12. When we get out of the K through 12 pipeline and into other options, that's where a lot of our students who fall in under that neurodiverse umbrella start to struggle, because navigating their own way into and through university, or into and through community college, or into and through or military service, or trade school, or any of the combination of the two, right? We have a lot of active duty military where we are that are doing some version of being in the service while also going to school. I know that's something that Tom did as well. And so trying to navigate all of that can be really challenging. And we need to recognize that and help them, one, cut them some slack, right? That's really important. And two, help them along those paths, help them be successful in those paths. And when all of the onus, much like what Kelly said, when all of the onus is on the student who maybe has some anxiety issues around going back to school because they have learning disabilities, or because they have autism, or because of ADHD, we need to be kind of mindful of that. Not kind of, we need to be really mindful of it and have a lot of systems and structures in place that really support them in being successful, right? One of the big pushes right now at the college that I work for is student retention year after year, and what we can be doing to help students stay engaged, to help them stay successful. Let's go to the next slide, Tom. That has some really good information. So over the last 20 years, the jump in students who come with diagnoses that fall under that neurodiverse umbrella has gone from about 2% to close to 12%. I would imagine it's probably more than that. But again, here we're talking about only formal diagnosis. And those students have higher levels of school disengagement and emotional difficulties than their peers without ADHD. And we have talked about this extensively, but comorbidities can include significant rates of anxiety and other mood disorders. Almost everybody that I know that identifies as neurodivergent because they have ADHD or autism also deals with some levels of anxiety or depression. And so we have to be considerate of those as well. I was telling Tom the other day that I have a student right now who has a formal ADHD diagnosis, and she's a military spouse, actually. She's had her medication changed 3 times in the span of our quarter, and she's only turned in 3 assignments. And she said, I'm using my husband's GI Bill. I need to pass the class. What do? I don't want to quit. She said, but my anxiety and my meds keep getting messed with. And I said, okay. So she and I sat down and made a plan. And I said, this is the plan that let's follow this plan for the next 4 weeks and see where we get. The students really need to know that they're not alone, because they're traversing a lot of issues: less college readiness, lower GPAs, fewer credits earned per semester. They're at a higher risk for discontinuous matriculation. And again, there's the social impairments. She reached out to me, this particular student reached out to me, but we have a lot of students that aren't comfortable reaching out to us. They're not comfortable asking those questions. If someone comes to them, they're willing to talk about it. But if it's left up to their own devices, they may not feel like they can do that or have those conversations with us. So it's really important that we are willing to provide that extra support, kind of that extra scaffolding, not just in our course materials, but also in our supports for our students. Tom?
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to pop in here is that a lot of times vets won't come to you and tell you that they have a problem, because as military members, we're taught about independence and toughing through things. And so a lot of times that just go unnoticed or ignored. And I'll move on to the next slide, which gets us to the to the veteran experience. So in 2011, there was a study of the veteran use of student support resources. And within this study, some of the interesting things that popped out were that the most commonly used resources were mental health related. So especially at the public 2-year and the private for-profit. In the public two-year, 60% said that campus mental health center was important for their success. Likewise, the Disability Services Center, the VA, the Student Veterans Group at 80%, and then other veterans. Veterans like to support veterans and get help from veterans. So that's another one of those pieces of information. Now, these numbers surprised me, even though I've worked in the field and I know myself a vet. The fact that these vets voluntarily went to the campus mental health center, and this is just the people that responded. So there's still a lot of unknowns outside of this group. Is there anything in this chart or the thing that's surprising or that pulls out questions?
One of the things I wonder is how many schools have specific services for veterans using their VA benefits or active duty using their VA benefits beyond just helping them process their paperwork. And if there are groups that are willing to work together, so like disability services and the VA and the mental health centers on campus, are they working together to create an environment that is less siloed and more cooperative? That would be something that I would kind of be interested in knowing.
Kelly Deal responded in chat. I teach at Stanley Community College, and we used to have a veterans support group on campus prior to the COVID outbreak. I don't think they've restarted the group since. And that's a good point. COVID kind of stopped a whole lot of activities on campus. Do you think, Kelly or anybody else, have you seen any impacts of those extra groups no longer being being active? Yeah. One of the things that surprised me with this was campus mental health center. I've worked at 3 different community colleges, and I haven't seen a campus mental health center. So I'm interested in exploring that more. And we will move on from here. So another interesting thing, that there has been an increase in diagnosis for ADHD among veterans. So I'm going to read the slide. Overall increases in demographic differences in adult veterans diagnosed with ADHD suggest a growing need to establish the reliability of diagnostic practices to ensure appropriate and equitable care. The data that comes along with the slide is that there was almost a 258% increase over 11-year time period, just in the number of diagnoses. Now, what's important for this is that an ADHD diagnosis may disqualify you from the military. And so if they got their diagnosis afterwards, it means that they might not have even known before they joined or were quiet about their diagnosis. So and they wouldn't pursue, they may or may not pursue a diagnosis while they're in the military. So that's one of the elements of this, is that students may not have gotten their care prior to leaving. And this is a big deal. This is a big thing. So I was in the nuclear Navy, and there were quite a few of us that have ADHD and other things, other diagnoses that we received afterwards. I'll get more into my story in a few slides. So this one is called Airman's story. And this is a story about a 19-year-old, not a 19-year-old, a person that's been in the Air Force for 19 years, active duty. He's diagnosed as autism spectrum disorder. He's very analytical and has all the stereotypes that go along with that, as far as difficulty forming social bonds, and is often considered an outsider even within their group, and which has led to a lot of issues within the military, because he doesn't communicate in the same way, and it's there's such a stigma around autism and autism spectrum that most people don't talk about it. One of the quotes from this is from a Forbes article, and all of the references are in the slide deck, and we'll be able to share those out. But this was big for me. The final step is to accept being autistic, said Norwitz. That is how we rise from the negative stereotypes. If we can learn and educate ourselves, we can elevate to a position of acceptance. And that's a big thing. That is a big deal. Having that self-acceptance is very important for the ongoing mental health and capability to move on. As Sheila mentioned, most people who are neurodivergent also have the comorbidities of anxiety and depression. So that self-acceptance and then acceptance as a community is very important to improving. Now this airman is after he's at 19 years. At 20 years, he will be going either into college or somewhere else in the workforce, and there's going to be change there, and so he's going to need some structure and some help and some other things as he transitions. Now my story. So I'm 50 years old as of last Friday. So my diagnoses are ADHD, dyscalculia. So dyscalculia is kind of like dyslexia, but with numbers. So I have a lot of problems with numeracy, keeping numbers and any mathematical concepts straight. Anxiety and depression. So all of these things. And I've had them since I was born. So it's at least the ADHD and dyscalculia, because I was built that way. But I wasn't diagnosed until 39. I lived most of my life that way. I had poor grades in high school. I left community college after a year and a half. Actually, I didn't know, a year. And I didn't really have many credits to that I could transfer. So I decided to join the Navy. And in a moment of brilliance, I joined the nuclear power program, which is one of the hardest academic programs. It's very math centric. It's very engineering centric, which my dyscalculia and my ADHD did not help with. I did poorly, but I finished. I finished the program with a lot of extra work and a lot of help. And then I finished my degree, my undergraduate, while on active duty. So while I was in a shore command, basically in the Navy, you go from at sea on a ship to in port at what they call a shore command, shore duty. So for 3 years you're at shore, 5 years at sea for my rotation. So I was able to finish my undergrad. But then I did grad school online. because all of the coursework was online and in a learning management system. So you may have heard the term backpack stuffer. So when I was a kid, I stuffed my backpack with all the papers that would then not get graded. And so learning management systems really helped me through all of this. And my time in the Navy and in the working world, having structures and things that can help me move through the keeping things organized, and Excel is an awesome tool for me because of my dyscalculia. It does the math for me. So as long as I can keep all the things in the right cells, everything is good. And yes, I've worked as an analyst, worked as a strategist, worked as in some very complex engineering functions. I just need a lot more tools. Kind of brings us to Joey. So Joey's a 27-year-old who just joined the Navy. He just completed his boot camp experience, and he has anxiety and depression. He attended community college, worked in different functions, and because he wasn't able to progress in jobs, move between jobs, wasn't able to keep any momentum. And so that's why he joined the military. And he entered a military trade, so he's going to be an electronics technician. And he intends to use the GI Bill when he leaves, and then also possibly finish college while he's in the service. Which means while he's doing this, while he's doing his own work, he's going to be preparing to then again re-enter the education system and civilian work practice. So with that, his transition story is going to be rocky unless we can get some help for him. Now these three stories were meant as kind of a background in what life is like for neurodiverse students and employees. Which brings us to employment and neurodiversity. Well, one, I'd like to get any responses from the stories. Is there anything that resonates or can be gleaned from the stories?
One of the things that you said, Tom, that really hit me, this is Sheila, was that a lot of service members won't get diagnosed until after they leave the service. And immediately what popped into my head was that means they're spending all that time in the service without the proper supports.
Right.
And then we wonder why people struggle so much.
Right. And it becomes one of those things with kind of don't ask, don't tell. So
Yeah.
While that was a formal policy for back in the 90s, it's still in play in neurodiverse circles. So the people just won't talk about it. They won't say it, and they won't pursue diagnosis. It's something that really needs to be addressed within the military.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But so what helps neurodivergent vets succeed? So one of the interesting things about the military is that it provides a lot of structure. And so that's one of the things that I didn't appreciate while I was in. I thought that there was too much structure, but that amount of structure helped me. I knew what was happening during the day. I knew there was a meeting in the morning, in the afternoon, and then before going home, there were, I didn't even have to decide what to wear every day. When I got out of the military and my first employer, which was in high tech, they said, I asked, what's the dress code? And they came back with, please wear clothes. And so I didn't even know what to wear. I had to learn what business casual was. I had to learn how to wear tennis shoes to work. It was odd. It was very discomforting, which helped me to realize that when new vets came in, I was like, okay, let's come over to the side and we'll talk about what it means now to work where you don't have a uniform. So structure is very important. So having a common and strong structure of when things are due, when things are available, where they're available, and having a process in place that can be referred to. And so those kinds of things, even something as simple as a shared file system on a network computer that people can access, and that's the common place for things to go. Also, that meetings are done or completed, and just a strong central structure within your organization. Support structures. So this is an interesting topic because there's that balance between providing all of the support or making support functions available. So within the veteran community, support looks a lot more like self-support, things that people can, that vets can go to and seek out, but also that are engaging once they get there. And this includes if you're an employer, if you're someone's supervisor, that you can provide access to things like EAP or mental health services, or even just a pat on the back, say everything's okay. Sometimes because anxiety is in play, that sometimes just a pat on the back or a virtual one that says, I still like you. That's I say that tongue in cheek, but anxiety and depression, sometimes people need that. Just and I'm here for you, and a list, have ready resources. And the next part is consistency. So consistent meetings, consistent consistent accountability, making sure that the meetings happen at certain times, that working between and with other people has a level of both moderation as well as a cadence of what happens at different times, and that's honored and respected, as well as then coming into flexibility, because sometimes people have different needs at different times. Now, one of the interesting things is that while this is what helps neurodivergent vets succeed, this is also good leadership. So in most cases, what helps neurodiversity and other elements of DEI is good leadership. Good leadership that respects the individual as well as the team. So that's one of the big elements that I really want to get across, is that helping neurodiverse employees and students and vets as well is just good leadership. And so with that, we have some actionable options for you. For school administrators, promote activities and policies that improve psychological safety. And psychological safety is something that Sheila is going to talk about here in a few slides. Create policies that increase the use of a consistent learning management system. In a lot of community colleges and universities, a lot of times faculty can use whichever learning management system that or other materials that are that they would like to use as part of academic freedom, which is totally understandable. But it also puts students in a place where they're having to context switch a lot. And then another element is hiring instructional designers to help construct courses and programs. And instructional designers are often exposed to universal design for learning concepts, which helps with neurodiversity and DEI and other elements of DEI. For instructors and faculty, have consistent module and unit structures, consistent due dates, like what's due on Wednesdays. Like for me, when I teach, I have discussions due on Wednesday, or submissions on Wednesday, responses by Friday, papers turned in by Sunday evening, and that happens on a cadence, so that my students know when the things are going to be due. And then that all files and examples are kept in common, well-titled spaces. So within the learning management system, have a way of naming the examples and naming the files and having them all in a space that says writing examples or writing samples or things of that nature. And for employers, promote EAP and mental health benefits. So in my job at University of Washington, I recently helped one of my employees use their EAP benefits, which I can't remember what EAP stands for, but it in most organizations, it's how you can access mental health functions for usually 6 or 7 visits. And people often use it during times of grief, but it can also be helpful when depression hits, when other things, when life gets to be a little too much. So promote the use of EAP. A lot of bosses don't even know that benefit exists. Also, provide some flexible scheduling when it's appropriate. So especially if the employees are salaried and a lot of the work is asynchronous, consider having flexible scheduling. My best times are honestly between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. as far as when I'm most focused. So the flexibility that helps with me is maybe a later starting time. And I've had great supervisors that have helped me with that. And it's things get really interesting and really cool when the flexible scheduling, when everybody is working at their peak times, some really cool things can happen. Then again, centralized file management and communications, even if it's just a SharePoint site or a shared folder where all the files are kept, that can really help for backpack stuffers like me, that, oh, well, I know that it's at least in this file in this place, and that it's going to be named in a certain way. And so one of the things that I have led most often, so a lot of my background is in process improvement, automation, and training. So one of the things that I do as soon as I become the manager is make sure that everything has a centralized centralized storage space, that we automate things like reminders and so like in SharePoint, you can set up a reminder that every week to do certain things, or if an assignment is coming due, that you get prompted. So all of those things can help.
One of the first things that we need to do to help, though, is establish spaces that are psychologically safe. Psychological safety is an idea that's put forth by Dr. Timothy Clark in a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, Defining the Path to Inclusion and Innovation. The 4 stages are inclusion safety, learner safety, collaborator safety, and challenger safety. With inclusion safety, it means you feel like you belong there. You feel safe to be yourself and are accepted for who you are, including your unique attributes and defining characteristics. Learner safety. Learner safety satisfies the need to learn and grow. In this stage, you feel safe to exchange in the learning process by asking questions, giving and receiving feedback, experimenting, and making mistakes. Stage 3 is contributor safety. Contributor safety satisfies the need to make a difference. You feel safe to use your skills and abilities to make a meaningful contribution. Stage 4 is challenger safety. Challenger safety satisfies the need to make things better. You feel safe to speak up and challenge the status quo when you think there is an opportunity to change or improve. No matter where we are in our spaces, and we're going to get to that in just a second, in our circles of impact, no matter where we are, there are things that we can do to create and maintain psychologically safe spaces. And it's one of the first things we need to work on. Tom, go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll talk about the circles of impact.
Yeah, I'd like to also point out that when we read the slides, it's not that we don't think that you can read the slides, but it's a common practice so that those who cannot have trouble seeing or processing can have it read. There you go, circles of impact.
So our circles of impact, there are 3 that we're going to talk about today. You'll see this organized in different ways, but we're going to talk about personal, organizational, and systemic or systems circles. In your personal circles, how do you help veterans feel psychologically safe? If you don't think they feel safe, why is that? In your organization, wherever you are in your organization, how does your organization help veterans feel psychologically safe within your institutional circles? How do you help veterans feel psychologically safe in their classes or workspaces? Systemic gets a little more challenging because there's a lot of us who feel like systemic issues are too big for us to deal with, but we can't ignore them. So one of the things that we can talk about is how we can influence legislation to create psychologically safe spaces for neurodiverse veterans, and how we can help neurodiverse veterans feel safe within our communities. One of the things that we would like to do with you now is we're going to go ahead and do another word cloud. And we would like you to put in words that bring to mind psychological safety for you. What helps you feel psychologically safe in spaces? Let me drop the link. I think I have it here.
I've got it.
Oh, fantastic, Tom. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, empathy is a big one. Yes, being allowed to feel authentic in a space, I think, particularly when we're talking about spaces that aren't built for certain communities, can be, being allowed to be authentic in those spaces can be really challenging. valued, feeling valued is a big one, I think, too. Feeling heard.
All right. I think the responses have slowed, so I think we can move.
All right.
All right. Let's talk about the impacts of that. I'm sorry, I just stole your thunder, Sheila.
No, you're good. No, you're absolutely fine. One of the things that I'd be really interested in hearing from other people is what their experiences are or how they feel psychologically safe in the spaces they've been in or in the circles they've been in, and what they feel like they can do or what they feel like we can do to help make spaces psychologically safe for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So what has made you folks feel psychologically safe? I know for me, feeling psychologically safe is especially around being heard and respected. And I know that's big for me.
Hey, Tom, will you go back to the word cloud for me for a second?
Yeah. There you go.
I think the one that really is sticking out for me is authentic, right? I think there are a lot of spaces in which we don't feel authentic, and for a lot of people that looks like code switching, maybe at work, or masking. Masking is something that I know I have several family members who are autistic, and they will spend their day masking at work and then come home, or school, and then come home and get to be what they feel like is their authentic self. They can info dump about their day, or they can not have to worry about phrasing something in a way that might come across as rude, but that they know that that home is a place that is safe for them to be authentic. And to me, that is a big one.
Yeah, in an interesting thing, my wife was recently diagnosed as autistic, and we've been married for 29 years, and we've only now been able to start to drop our own masks and be more authentic in our own home, and it's been incredible. We wear so many masks, even with the people that we're supposed to feel safe with. All right,
We have just a few minutes left, Tom, so we might want to open the floor for questions.
yeah, please, questions, comments, emotional outbursts.
I should mention, since we are kind of short on time, that this is an area of research for both Tom and I. So I'm going to drop a survey link into the chat, and it would be very helpful for us if you could fill out the survey. You're welcome to pass it along to others if you like, so that we can do some research in and around how to better support our neurodiverse and veteran students. So I'm going to drop that in the chat.
And also, if you'd like to contact us for more information, have discussions, this is our topic, this is our passion. So feel free. Okay. So Kelly's asking a question. To clarify, if someone has an ADHD diagnosis in high school, after graduation, are they disqualified from entering the military, or does it depend on their medications? That's a great question, and it does depend on their medications, and there's usually some waiverability. And I don't know all of the details on this, but it is medication dependent. One of the things that I have heard is that they're not allowed to take some of their medications because they are controlled substances in a lot of cases, amphetamine in nature. So, and I don't know if that's part of the issue, but it doesn't disqualify them, from what I understand.
It's going to, my experience with it, and in our family's experience, it's going to depend directly upon the doctors that do their entry evaluations. Some doctors will sign exemptions and some doctors will disqualify them. So.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting gray areas, because properly diagnosed and medicated allows for much greater success. For those of us who weren't diagnosed and didn't use medication, basically coffee and adrenaline is what keeps us square. So in the Navy, we call it being a squared away sailor. Yeah, it's just lots of coffee and anything else that can keep us focused. Any other questions? No? All right. I think that our contact information is part of our bios, so please get in touch. And I guess we turn this back over to you, Kelly.
Yes, thank you both. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. I don't know if it's Zoom or my computer or a bit of both, but my screen is not cooperating with me. But thank you both so much. We appreciate it. And if there's anything you need, of course, reach out via that contact information like they said. But thank you all for attending. And I believe there is an additional session, one more session for the day that you can attend. So please feel free to hop on over to that session, register if you haven't already to get the link. But thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for your help, Kelly.
No problem.
Yes, Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience as we had some Zoom problems. I appreciate it.
No worries. All right, enjoy the rest of your day, Kelly. And
Thanks.
for everybody else too, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Bye all.